First of all, I want to thank the content creators on TikTok that have shouted me out. I have been doing old Hollywood scandals for 3 long years, and I have seen a lot of my stories or details from my stories pop up on TikTok, and it was like I couldn't get no credit from no doggone body. So I am very grateful that y'all have decided to shout me out, and also I know it may be more content creators than just the 2 on the screen, and I want to say if you are one of those creators, a million thank yous from me. I truly appreciate it. Now let's get to the video.
So most of us, if not all of us, know all about the beautiful but tragic Black actress Dorothy Dandridge. But what about the sister that performed alongside her on her way to stardom? What about the sister who is kind of left out in the cold when Dorothy became a star? What about Vivian Dandridge? This is Ashley with Ashley Says So, and after hearing this story, I want you guys to leave your comments and opinions and tell me what you think.
Now y'all know this disclaimer like the back of y'all hand. The whole video is hearsay, rumor, and gossip that I find on TV, online, magazine, books, and I ball it all up and I tell you guys a story. It's all for entertainment purposes only. Now let's get to it.
Vivian Alpharetta Dandridge was born on April the 22nd, 1921 in Cleveland, Ohio. She was the firstborn daughter to Ruby and Cyril Dandridge, and while her birth was said to have elated her father Cyril, there may be evidence that Ruby didn't quite feel the same. You see, Ruby and Cyril, although married, were not stable at all. In fact, they didn't even have their own home. They lived with Cyril's mother. And maybe it was because of this that Cyril, although he was a nice, good, and kind man, he rarely kept a job and he didn't have any ambition or drive, whereas his wife Ruby had all of the ambition and drive in the world. And it's quite possible that when she first married Cyril, she thought she could mold him to be similar to her, mold him into a man with dreams. But she found out quite quickly that she was barking up the wrong tree. Cyril was just content with this arrangement. You know, he had his wife by his side, he had his mother, and now he had his daughter. And because Cyril was like this, many people believe that Ruby looked at Vivian's birth almost like entrapment, like the walls were closing in and she would never reach her dream. So when Ruby became pregnant with her second child, she was mortified. She felt like she needed to run for the hills immediately. And so when she was 5 months pregnant, she took 1-year-old Vivian by the hand and she left her husband Cyril for good. It's claimed that Ruby went to live with distant family members where she ended up giving birth to her second child, which was a girl named Dorothy. But by the time Dorothy was around 2 and Vivian was around 3, she ended up meeting a lady by the name of Geneva Williams. Geneva Williams, a woman who was thought to be a little bit older than Ruby, and she certainly was more settled, claimed that she also was going through her own divorce. And she told Ruby that she wouldn't mind helping Ruby raise her 2 young daughters and they could even live in her house. She also knew a thing or two about performing arts, and this was music to Ruby's ears because Ruby wanted to go into show business. As a matter of fact, by this point, she was already performing in small shows and churches. So Ruby and her girls move in with Geneva, and of course, Ruby is very appreciative of Geneva, so they become very, very close friends, and over time, they even become lovers. As Ruby's daughters, Vivian and Dorothy, began to grow, she started to be complimented everywhere she went on how beautiful her little girls were, especially the baby girl Dorothy. And Dorothy at this age was simply the child who stood out. She was always clapping, singing, dancing, had a big, huge smile on her face. She was much more active than Vivian, who mostly appeared shy. And Dorothy also always seemed to be putting on a show. So it wasn't long before Ruby and Geneva discussed the possibility of Dorothy becoming a performer. They put their idea to the test, and Dorothy performed at a small church service, and it was over from there. She was very quickly invited to multiple churches, and she wowed every crowd every time. Everybody in the Dandridge household was pleased with this success except one person, Ruby's other daughter, Dorothy's elder sister, Vivian. Contrary to popular belief, when Dorothy first started performing as a little girl, her mother did not ask Vivian to join her. It wasn't until Vivian came stumping up to her mother with her little arms folded and tears in her little eyes, asking Ruby why couldn't she perform, that Ruby asked Geneva could they add Vivian to the show, and they did. And this was probably the very first time that Vivian experienced the effects of favoritism when it came to her sister Dorothy, but it sure enough would not be the last. Because honey, just because Vivian was added to the show, that didn't mean a darn thing. Dorothy was clearly the star star. Sources say that Ruby just did not see star quality in Vivian, and I'm not sure why, but because she didn't, Vivian was really kind of relegated to the side. But to move on with the story, now that she and Dorothy were performing together, they were now traveling under the moniker the Wonder Children. And honey, they are soaring. Geneva is their choreographer, she is their vocal coach, she is their manager, and she had those girls on point because baby, believe me, she was the very first Joe Jackson. If they missed a step, there was a smack. If they sang in the wrong key, there was a smack. And all this was made worse because Geneva was actually the piano player whenever the girls performed. So she was able to sit back and kind of watch every step while they were performing and listen to every note. And she would keep note if they messed up on anything. And of course, Dorothy and Vivian did not want to be beat, so they became little perfectionists. And because they were always on point, it wasn't long before they were the breadwinners for their family. I mean, these girls were pulling in about $400 to $500 per show. Now, by the time Vivian and Dorothy had grew into teens, the family had moved to California, and Vivian had become friends with a girl named Etta Jones. Soon, it was found that Etta Jones could actually sing, and she was added to their group, and the group was now going by the name the Dandridge Sisters. And these girls were quite the spectacle. Baby, they were striking, tall, statuesque, and looked like beauty queens in the face. And with great talent to boot, it was no time before they started getting booked into every club around town. And even though the Dandridge sisters were a group, Dorothy was always the best known out of all of them. Ruby made sure that her baby girl would be right smack dab in the middle every time they sang. It did not matter if Etta or Vivian were leading the song or had a solo part in the song where they needed to be in the middle. Baby, listen, they better just lean in into the mic. Speaking on this favoritism, as Vivian and Dorothy grew older, it was at an all-time high. Ruby started to raise them with a dynamic of Vivian being here to help Dorothy. But to get back to the story, not only were the Dandridge sisters booked in every club, their good looks and talents made them the top choice for movies. Anytime any movie needed to do a singing cutscene with a group of black girls, the Dandridge sisters were the choice. Their good looks and charms attracted something else too. Men, and lots of them. Those men acted like animals when those girls were around. When they had to sing in the clubs, the men would be hooting and hollering and salivating and reaching and grabbing. Y'all remember what I told y'all that Bojangles said to Dorothy Dandridge in her ear when she went and sat on his lap and she was a teenager? Remember how he told her that these men out here would gobble her up, and he knew for a fact because he wanted to gobble her up? So this was dangerous, and Vivian, Etta, and Dorothy had to deal with it. And this over attraction from men brought another level of danger into Vivian and Dorothy's life, and that came from their auntie Neva. And maybe it's because Geneva had a bad experience with men before in her life, I don't know. But what I do know is that she became obsessed with Vivian and Dorothy's virginity. Geneva started doing everything in her power to make sure the girls remained virginal, telling them not to switch so much, tie some of their body parts down, they sticking out too much. And when all of this wasn't enough to give Geneva a peace of mind that these girls were indeed still virgins, she started doing the unthinkable. In fact, she downright started abusing the girls her own doggone self. And she did this by performing finger checks. Every time Vivian and Dorothy performed or even just went someplace and men were there, if Geneva was not there with them watching over them, when these girls came back home, she would force them to let her do finger check, inserting her raw, ungloved fingers to check and see if their hymen was intact. And I don't know if Vivian and Dorothy fought Geneva off from doing this at first, but when she started to do it more often than not, both of them felt like something was wrong with this. The basic problem is that you don't do that to anybody. You don't invade somebody's body and personal space and stuff like that. And the second thing is obvious. The girls started to kind of put two and two together. Geneva, although they called her auntie, they knew that she was their mother's lesbian lover. Lesbians like women. And this lesbian older woman is practicing insertion on these young girls. It was a terrifying experience alliance that happened over and over to Vivian and Dorothy until one day Dorothy stood up and knocked Geneva down on her behind and told her, "You're not going to do that to us anymore." And honestly, I feel like that the only reason the finger check stopped is because it was Dorothy who stood up and said something about it. And if you're wondering why it wasn't Vivian that stood up to Geneva, with her being the oldest, the folks say that Vivian rarely stood up to anything at that age. She was really a go-along to get along child, and she never challenged her mother or Geneva on anything. She always did what she was told. But now that these girls were growing into adulthood, Vivian was definitely about to start showing some resentment. And she showed it by breaking all the rules. Baby, 17, 18, Vivian started to act out. Hanging out with boys all through the night, tongue kissing all different type of boys, showing her goodie. She was acting like a straight hoochie mama, and allegedly Vivian admitted to being fast at that age. But it really seems like the reason she was doing all of this was not only resentment, but because she also wanted attention. She wanted Ruby to notice her the same way that Ruby noticed Dorothy. But Vivian could act out as much as she wanted to. Child, Ruby was not going to give that girl a second glance unless she had a question to ask her regarding Dorothy. Now, by 1939, both Vivian and Dorothy were sick of living at home and they were ready to strike out on their own. But Dorothy was ready to do even more than that. She was ready to leave the Dandridge sisters. Dorothy's dream was not to sing. Dorothy's dream was to act. And this did not go down well with Vivian at all. While Etta Jones moved on and started a family and settled down, Vivian didn't know what she was going to do. All of her life, it had been her and Dorothy together. Also, Dorothy was always kind of the leader. I think Vivian felt like her success depended on Dorothy. And so she felt like Dorothy was being selfish by leaving the group and essentially leaving her out in the cold. And Dorothy felt like Vivian was being selfish because Dorothy had bigger dreams. And although most people could kind of see it from both sides, their mother Ruby saw it from one side. Dorothy's side. And when Vivian came to her and kind of tried to talk to her about her feelings, like, "Mama, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I think Dorothy's mean for leaving." "Well, your sister wanna act. I'm gonna support Dorothy all the way." And Vivian is like, "Okay, Mama, I understand that, but I don't really know what I'm gonna do." "Well, shoot, I don't know what you're gonna do either. You need to figure out something." Vivian just really did not have the support that Dorothy had. But after shedding some tears and wondering what she was going to do, she decided that since Dorothy was going the acting route, she would go the singing route, the nightclub route. And so by 1940, the girls were going their separate ways, but they still had a lot in common, like in 1942, when they both married their first husband. Dorothy ended up marrying the famous Harold Nicholas, and Vivian married a man by the name of Jack Montgomery. And while Dorothy's marriage to Harold lasted about 9 years, Vivian's marriage fizzled out within the first year, and gossip claims that it possibly was Vivian's fault. Now, baby, the folks say that soon after marrying Jack Montgomery, Vivian went out dancing to a club and she ended up meeting the actor named Emmett Babe Wallace. Vivian had always gotten second best, and now here she was with a legitimate Hollywood actor. I'm talking about an actor who appeared alongside Lena Horne, sitting in her face, talking to her. Vivian was in a full-blown swoon, and more than that, gossip claims that she was intimate with the actor Babe Wallace while she was married to Jack Montgomery. Gossip also claims that Vivian got pregnant by the actor Babe Wallace, and either her husband Jack Montgomery found out and left her, or she left her husband Jack Montgomery to be with the actor Babe Wallace. Whichever one is true, she and her husband divorced in 1943, and Vivian gave birth to her son Michael Wallace in 1943. It is believed that after Vivian and Jack's marriage was over, that she thought that she was going to get with Babe Wallace, that they were going to be a couple, get married, and raise their son together. But she found out that Babe did her like many older men do young women. Told her what she wanted to hear and left her with a baby. So now, with Vivian's marriage in shambles and a baby to take care of, she hit the club circuit with a vengeance. But unfortunately, outside of small dates, there really was no work to be found for her. What she did find, though, is another husband. Warren Bracken was a jazz piano player, and some people even say a band leader, and the first time he saw Vivian, he thought she was the most beautiful girl in the world. He wined and dined Vivian, and his pursuance of her made her affection grow, and so she and Warren were married in the year 1945. And although the folks say that one time Vivian bust this man upside the head with a high heel shoe, most of the time their marriage was stable and very, very happy. And they had these huge plans of how he would be playing the piano with his band and how Vivian would be singing. You know, they would light up the stage, and then later on they would light up the chart. But somebody put a pin in that dream really quick, and that was Vivian's manager. He told Vivian that it was a mistake that she got married. Her job was to sell a dream, that she was supposed to be the sexy, untouchable diva that all the men in the audience drooled over, and that it was just plain not sexy for her to be on stage with her husband. And when Vivian tried to compromise by saying, you know, okay, cool, we won't perform together, you know, we won't be on stage together, but we'll just perform at the same club, her manager told her that this would still ruin her career and that club owners just don't want to deal with that. Basically, what he was trying to say is that if the club owner wanted to come on to Vivian, probably touch on her, probably do something with her, he wanted to be able to do that without fear that her piano player husband was going to come and bust him upside the head. And so although Warren Bracken loved Vivian's dirty draws, for Vivian, it pretty much came down to choosing her career over her husband. And so she chose her career. And so the same year that she married Warren Bracken, 1945, is the same year that she divorced Warren Bracken. Honestly, though, Vivian really could have just stayed married because wasn't nobody checking for her. Even though her agent had given her this advice, he still had trouble really booking her anywhere. Vivian kept pushing, though, and along the way, she found another husband. This guy's name was Ralph Bledsoe. She married him in 1946, but left him in 1947. And although Vivian could catch a man like this, she couldn't catch a career to save her life. And by 1950, Vivian had been doing this thing for 10 years without even a spark. And I don't know if she looked at her sister Dorothy as competition, but if she did, she may have been pleased to know that Dorothy's foray into acting wasn't going well either. Yes, Dorothy had some singing and dancing scenes in movies, and she even had a movie with a talking part. But she was far from a Hollywood success story, and maybe Vivian was a little bit glad about this. But baby, let me tell you something. If she was glad, her behind should have been mad. Because since Dorothy was not successful in her quest for acting, her manager came up with a different path to get Dorothy into the movies and into stardom. And that path was nightclub. And the way that Dorothy's manager went about this plan would wreak havoc on Vivian's nightclub career. Because Dorothy's manager was not with the BS, baby. He revamped Dorothy's whole image. Instead of her looking like a 1940s preppy good girl, he turned her into a smoldering honeypot club act. Dorothy hit the ground running, y'all. She really did. Gig after gig after gig, totally obliterating her sister Vivian's nightclub career. Allegedly, this change hurt Vivian deeply. She felt betrayed by this. You know, Dorothy was supposed to go into acting. That's what she said. Nightclub and singing was supposed to be Vivian's thing. Why? Why is this happening? And I don't know if Vivian ever got an answer to that question, but rumor has it she started to act a bit different towards Dorothy. Almost like she was making Dorothy pay for being the prettier one of the two. Like she was making Dorothy pay for her success. Literally. She would buy things she couldn't afford and then call Dorothy for the monthly payment. If she wanted a new outfit, she would kind of guilt trip Dorothy into buying it. Just acting out in petty ways. But to get back to the main story, most people felt like Vivian would just kind of hang up her career after this. But baby, Vivian had another thing coming. If her sister could revamp her image and sell music purely through her sex appeal, then Vivian could do the same thing. All she needed was the right person who knew the business and could offer her the same glow up that her sister got. And she found this person in a man by the name of Forrest Stead. Forrest styled himself as a man who was very knowledgeable about show business, listing people he had worked with, you know, and talking about his skills to Vivian. Vivian was desperate to believe him and hoped that he could work this magic on her. And of course, for some reason, Forrest's magic included marriage. So in the year 1951, Vivian and Forrest got married. And to his credit, he did immediately get to work. He rebranded his wife and tried to sell her back to the world. He had glamorous photos circulating in the press. And it did indeed boost Vivian's booking somewhat. She was at least popular enough where she could appear in the movie Bright Road alongside her sister. She was only on the screen for probably around 10-20 seconds, but you know, at least she got that. But the ironic thing about it, the movie Bright Road actually ended up messing up Vivian's career even more than it already was. And it's not that Vivian messed up on screen or anything like that. It actually had nothing to do with Vivian. It was all about Dorothy. Although the movie Bright Road was not a hit, Dorothy was the star of that movie. And since Dorothy had been on the movie screen and now she was looked at like a legit star, Vivian started to be looked at as the cheap imitation version of Dorothy. You know, the small number of clubs that used to book her and show interest in her were now not interested at all. They didn't want their audience saying, oh, so y'all couldn't get the real Dorothy Dandridge, so y'all done got this heifer. Who is this? This is just a fake imitation Dandridge, ain't it? They did not want Vivian, and there was something else bad to add onto her life. She didn't really know her husband, Forrest. The man turned out to have a huge gambling problem, and he gambled away all of her money. Not only her money, he gambled away all of his money. He started to pawn things in their household. She divorced him in 1953. Life was just not going well for Vivian. You know, she felt like a laughing stock, and also she was back to square one. And even though she and Dorothy were not as close as they used to be, they still had a relationship. In fact, Vivian was the one who helped Dorothy prepare when she was going out for the role Corman Jones. And I know Vivian was happy for her sister, but it still must have hurt when Dorothy not only got the role of Corman Jones, she slam dunked it on the screen. You know, here her sister is. She's killed the nightclub scene and the movie scene, and Vivian can't even book a gig at a nightclub. And I truly hope for real at this point that Vivian didn't have no kind of competitive blood or anything in her spirit, because if she did, baby, at this point it was game over. All Vivian could do is just let it go and bask in the Dandridge family glory. One of their own had become a superstar, a 20-foot goddess in Technicolor. And it really does seem like Dorothy had some sort of semblance of how her sister must have felt. Because Dorothy really did go out of her way to try to make sure that her sister came to all of the functions with her, the red carpet events, the fancy dinners, the private balls, even to the Academy Awards when she could have chosen anybody. She brought her sister Vivian. And so it seemed like Dorothy was trying to keep things calm. But after a while, even if Dorothy didn't truly feel this way on the inside, the relationship with Vivian, it was kind of clear that Dorothy looked at Vivian more like a helper or somebody that was just kind of there to serve her. Like, Dorothy would call Vivian to come and do her hair on movie sets, or she would call Vivian when she needed Vivian to pick out an outfit for her. And yes, she would continue to take Vivian to shows, but this only happened so Vivian could be a calming effect on Dorothy. Like, Dorothy wanted Vivian there to calm her nerves. So there definitely was a changing dynamic, and there is this one brutal story out there. Gossip claims that Vivian was Dorothy's hairdresser on a certain movie set, and after Vivian got done with Dorothy's hair, Dorothy looked in a mirror and baby, she went off. What is this? Why did you do my hair like this, Vivian? What were you thinking? I mean, I'm serious. This is terrible, Vivian. I can't do this. Do it all over again. Get over here and do my hair right. Do it all over again. I'm talking about they said that she was talking to Vivian like a dog. And under other circumstances, Vivian might have said, you know, girl, you crazy. I'm not doing nothing to your hair again. Forget you. In this instance, they were on set. There were directors, producers, other actors, all type of studio people just walking around. And basically, they dared Vivian to say something back to one of their stars. Baby sister or not, her behind wouldn't have another job in Hollywood, whether it was a movie, a nightclub, or even as a hairdresser, she wouldn't work again, and Vivian knew this. So she sat back and she took it. But that don't mean she didn't tell nobody after she left the set, because allegedly Vivian told this story to multiple people. She basically was telling people, y'all don't know Dorothy. Dorothy is changing. Dorothy is stuck up and very arrogant. And from my research, it didn't seem like she usually talked about her sister like that. So for her to be doing this and kind of trying to turn people against Dorothy, clearly this situation hurt her feelings. Still though, even after this incident, Vivian and Dorothy did make up, but there still were times when Dorothy would get lippy with Vivian. Probably not to that extent, but there were times she had a nasty attitude. And it's possible that Dorothy treated Vivian like this because she may have looked at Vivian like a dependent. Because rumor has it Vivian was never too shy to ask for some of Dorothy's money, and it's actually a money situation that is rumored to have damaged their relationship permanently. By 1955, Vivian's life was everything I just explained. Basically a wingman and helper to Dorothy. Her own career was at a standstill and she was unhappy with that. Also, she had grown very distant from her mother, Ruby. And it was because every time she was around Ruby, all she would hear is, Vivian, have you heard what your sister doing now? Ooh, you ought to hear what they paying Dorothy. Ooh, Vivian, you know about this new movie Dorothy about to do? Your sister is a star. Your sister is a star. And all of this stuff with Dorothy and Ruby and Vivian's career, all of it just kind of started eating away at Vivian. And one day it all came to a head. And allegedly on this day, Vivian needed some money, so she called her sister Dorothy like she always did. Well, when Dorothy came to the phone and Vivian asked for the money, allegedly Dorothy told her very short and snippy like, Vivian, you need money again? Look, talk to Earl. Call Earl and let him handle it. He'll fix you up because I just can't deal with this right now. Bye. Now, in case y'all don't know who Earl is, that was Dorothy's manager, Earl Mills. And it was something about Dorothy kind of relegating her or pushing her to the side to talk to her manager that made Vivian very upset. Maybe she felt like a true charity case. Maybe she felt like Dorothy was treating her like she was just a stranger begging on the street. I don't know how she felt, but again, in my opinion, I can see it from both sides. Dorothy did not have to be snappy like that, but at the same time, maybe Dorothy didn't have the money, or maybe she was going through a bad time. It doesn't matter though. Vivian did not like it, and after this phone call, Vivian Dandridge disappeared. Baby, the year was 1956, and Vivian's behind was unheard of. And at first, Dorothy and Ruby just kind of felt like Vivian was going off doing her own thing because she did that a lot. But after about 6 months passed with no word from Vivian, they got worried, so much so that Dorothy ended up hiring a private investigator to find her sister. The private investigator was successful, and what he found was Vivian decided that America was just not for her. If she wanted success, she needed to go to France, a country that was notorious for making and remaking Black celebrity careers. Josephine Baker, Nina Mae McKinney, Baby Esther, the list goes on and on. Vivian felt like here she wouldn't have to live in her sister's shadow, and just to make sure of that, she changed her stage name to Marina Roselle and she went for her destiny. But y'all, destiny was just nowhere to be found. And so instead, Vivian did something that she knew she was good at: hooking up with a man and marrying him. And this guy's name was Gustav Frederick, and she married him in 1958. Now, while Dorothy was probably happy to have found her sister and wanted to resume contact with her sister, that really just did not happen. Vivian wouldn't talk to her sister or her mother. The most she would do really was send a postcard. And the couple of times that she did reach out by phone is because Vivian was very, very desperate, and so she would call Dorothy sometimes and ask for money. And a lot of people try to say that Vivian was just very spiteful, jealous, mean, and envious. And I have no doubt that there definitely was some jealousy there. I think it was more than that. She was just surrounded by her sister's success and her failure. It was just everywhere. I think she kind of felt like Dorothy took over all lanes and just really did not leave anything for her. Maybe Vivian had her own date of when she would go back and make up with her sister. But if she did, whenever that date was, it was too late. Because one day in 1965, Vivian opened up the newspaper and saw an article that her sister Dorothy was dead. The story says that Dorothy's death hit Vivian hard, and she was hurt, and she also was ashamed. Suddenly she became very embarrassed by her distance, by the way she had been acting. And although she did tell a few people that she was grieving in her own way and that she was very hurt and that she loved her sister very much, many people judged her because she didn't come back for the funeral.
And Vivian basically let them. The only response she would ever give is that she knew her sister, they had a special connection, and her sister Dorothy knew just how Vivian felt about her. And although Vivian didn't come to the funeral, she did return to the U.S. 3 years later in 1968.
Which is when she divorced her husband. And although she had been through a tragedy and depression and hurt over the years, Vivian was ready to give her career another go. Dorothy, bless her heart, had passed away some years before, so there was no fear of living in her sister's shadow. It was now or never. So she signed with Jubilee Records and released an album, and although Vivian was absolutely stunning on the album cover and in the album promo pics, the album dropped, baby, and kept on dropping down to hell. It didn't work, it didn't go, it wasn't it. And it's so sad for Vivian, but honestly, I think this is what Vivian needed. I do feel that for a long time she had a burning question, wondering if her career didn't take off because she was living in her sister's shadow, or if it was because of her, if she was lacking in some way, and she was the reason her career really wouldn't take off. And I really think this final attempt answered the question. Yes, she was very talented. Yes, she was very beautiful, but a lot of times it takes more than that to become a star. You have to have star power. So I believe when this venture failed, Vivian did do a little bit more gigging, but after that, she finally called it quits. And maybe the missed time with Dorothy haunted Vivian because the story says that she did end up reconnecting with Ruby, but I honestly don't think Ruby was really interested in reconnecting with Vivian. And I say this because rumor says their new relationship was very contentious, and not only that, when Ruby ended up passing away, she left everything in her will to Earl Mills instead of her living daughter, Vivian. And that to me is the final slap in the face for Vivian. One thing though that Vivian was winning in is that she had her own family. You remember she had her son Michael, and then she also had some granddaughters. And one of her granddaughters is a current actress, and she has that beautiful Dandridge face, honey. Even got the Dandridge mole, baby, and her name is Nayo Wallace. And it's said that Vivian had a relationship with her son, with her grandchildren. And because of that, she may have had a leg up in something else. And that was the fact that when she passed away, it's very possible that she was surrounded by her family and friends, whereas Dorothy passed away completely alone. Speaking of passing away, after Vivian finally retired from show business, she settled in Seattle, and that is where she lived all the way up until October the 26th, 1991, when she ended up suffering from a stroke and passing away. Vivian Dandridge was 70 years old. So guys, this is another one that I went to the absolute trenches for, and I really, this time for real, would appreciate it if you guys would hit the like button and also leave me a comment of an opinion on this video. Let me know what you think about the envy and the jealousy. And do you think somebody in this story was wrong? Was Dorothy wrong? Vivian wrong? Ruby? Tell me what y'all think. If you are new here, go ahead and click the subscribe button and turn your notifications on for all. If you are not new here and you've been watching, I tell y'all every video, go ahead and subscribe. It don't cost you nothing. Love y'all so much. Bye.